Hi, so one of the questions that has been asked is how many quotes should I use? Many students struggle with this. They struggle to know how many quotations to use. And it's a kind of one of those questions that as an educator that I don't really like because it gives students the false impression that they even need to quote loads. And the problem with that is it can lead them to just retelling events rather than analyzing. So it's not about the number of quotations used, it's about supporting your argument. So I'm going to share my screen with you and explain this in more depth. And this is going to be really beneficial to your child. And this is applicable for language and for literature. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So we're going to look at not only how many quotations should you use, but when you should go in depth and when you should look at multiple quotations or when you should go into depth with a single quotation as well. Okay, so how many quotations should I use? So whenever you make a new point, you should support it with a quotation. This is a good general rule. So many students, they make a bold statement, but then they don't support it with quotations. They might say something quite general and then move on. So for example, if your child is studying, let's think, A Christmas Carol. So they might be studying A Christmas Carol. And they might say something like, at the start of the novella, Scrooge is presented as greedy. Rather than using a quotation, they might then go on to say something like, at the start of the novella, Scrooge is presented as greedy. He doesn't give any money to the charity collectors. However, later on in the novella, he changes and becomes more generous. Now, can you see there are 2 points being made here? The 2 points are one, that he is greedy, and the second one is that he's changed. Now, your child has to then support them. They have to prove their point. And in order to do that, they need to use quotations. So it's really important that you encourage your child to think about it. When they make a new point or when they make any point, they need to back it up. They need to prove it with a quotation. Now, for literature, if they've already got the extract, then it's really important that they quote verbatim. That means that they quote exactly what the, from word for word, what the quotation is in the text or the poem, the novella, the novel, the play. And for language, that is especially important because they only have the extract there. Now, for quotes that they have to remember, so this is for poetry anthology or for other parts of the novel, or sometimes with some examples, particularly OCR, they don't have all of the extract there. They say you have to look at the wider context of the play or the novel. And that's actually true for all of the examples. So AQA, EdExcel, EduCast, WJC, OCR. It's really important that your child memorizes quotations. However, if they can't remember them word for word, it's okay for them to paraphrase it. Okay, so that's okay to do, but they should still make sure that for every new point that they support it with a quotation. So how many quotations should I use? So as I said, we've already answered that question. So let's have a look at this then. So this should be saying how to select relevant quotes. So this is the other area of weakness then. So a lot of students, as I stated, so one of the questions was, how many quotations should I use? Well, as I said, whenever there's a new point, you need to justify it. You need to support it. The second thing that you have to do is to know how to select quotations, because unfortunately, lots of students will choose a quote and it's not relevant. So, for example, if we go back to Christmas Carol and we have Scrooge being greedy, they might choose a quotation that actually doesn't support that. So they might say that he is like cold, okay? And there's at the start of the novella, it describes him as being quite cold. Now, that's an okay quotation, but does it really prove that he is greedy? Not really. A better quote might be, he's tight-fisted. Yeah, it says that he's tight-fisted. That would be a better quotation to use. Why? Well, because it's directly linked to that point, okay? So in order to help your child choose relevant quotations, it's important that they use keywords from the question. It's ensure that they can identify techniques. So again, too often students will choose a quotation and not know how to explain it. They won't know how to analyze it. So it's important that they're able to identify techniques and make sure you can analyze and explain the effect of the techniques in light of the question. So it's really important that they are able to explain why that quote is relevant to their point they're making and why that's relevant to the argument that they're arguing in light of the question. Okay. So this is the kind of guidelines that you want to encourage your child to use. Now, when to analyze one quotation depth. So sometimes it's really important that your child goes into depth when analyzing, and you should focus on one quotation in depth. And this is when the question requires a detailed exploration of a specific idea, theme, or character. The quotation contains rich language features allowing for deep analysis, for example, metaphor, symbolism, or ambiguity. So this is when you are able to explain the quotation on the surface, the explicit, and then what's implicit, the hidden meaning. And then the moment in text is significant, shaping the reader's understanding of a theme or character. So, for example, if we look at Macbeth, in Macbeth the play, Macbeth commits regicide. He kills King Duncan in order to become king. A pivotal moment in the play is when he reveals his deep, dark desires. You have an aside where he admits that he wants to be king. He has that ambition, but he's too afraid to do it. That is a key moment. Why? Well, one, it reveals to the audience that he has that burning desire, but two, it tells us that he also has an inner conflict and inner turmoil because he has that sense of morality there. So that's important. So you might want to go into depth about a key quotation from that speech. The response needs to demonstrate close reading of the text. So that's when you have to go into detail. So how to analyze one quotation effectively. So you want to link it to the question. You want to think about how does this quotation support your argument? Explain what is happening in the text at this moment. Analyze any language and subject terminology. So you need to identify keywords, techniques, and explore their effects. So this could be language, structure, or literary techniques. Explore the themes. How does the quotation connect to the wider ideas in the text? And consider the surface and symbolic meaning. So what does the quotation suggest beyond its literal meaning? So you want to look at it and explain what it means, and then you want to go in depth. And then you want to think about, this is the last two, 6 and 7, are really for students who are trying to achieve, grade 6 and above. You think about other interpretations. So you have your argument, but you want to think about how somebody else might interpret it. However, if you're going to do that, it's really important that you are then able to justify your argument. So, for example, let's say we're looking at Macbeth, and you had a question about how Lady Macbeth is presented as evil. You might say something like, on the surface, she is presented as evil. However, upon deeper analysis, it is quite clear that she is a naive woman lacking real power. Okay, so then that's our main argument, that she lacks any real power. But we might want to look at different interpretations. So we can say something like this. When we look at her speech, she says, "Unsex me here, you evil spirits." So she asks to become masculine. Now, on the face of it, she seems, if we look at this, what does this mean? Well, actually, it reminds us of the witches at the start of the play, and it allows us to think of her as quite witch-like, and so she seems powerful because she seems supernatural. However, if we look at it deeper, we can see that this is just a fleeting moment. The fact that she has to kind of strip away her femininity highlights the lack of power that she has. And in context of the time period, women had very few rights. And as you see when the play progresses, she actually loses her influence and control over Macbeth, highlighting that any real power that she has is because of Macbeth giving it to her. And so upon this lens, we can see that Lady Macbeth is actually a dutiful wife supporting her husband. And we know already that he wants to be king because he's revealed in an aside his ambition. So can you see how we've looked at different interpretations? We looked at one, yes, on the surface she is seen as evil. However, when we expand on it and look deeper and look at the context, we can see that actually she's not. Okay, and again, you want to look at context. How does historical, social, literary context enhance our understanding? So for this, you have to remember it's not a history lesson, but you do want to make sure that you're going into depth. So you want to try and go into specific details. So you might want to think about a law or a statistic or something like that that helps support this idea of, at the time period, women having fewer rights. Okay. So when to use multiple quotations? So you should use multiple quotations when the question asks for a comparison of ideas, characters, or themes, when a broader overview is required. They are tracking a character's development or how a theme evolves. The response benefits from showing a range of evidence rather than focusing on one quotation. So how to use multiple quotations effectively. So group quotations by theme or character. This keeps the response structured. Keep analysis concise. Avoid explaining every word in detail unless it's essential. And make links between quotations. Show how ideas develop. And use short embedded quotations and integrate them naturally within sentences. So you want to use multiple quotations when you're tracking anything. So when you're tracking a theme development or character development. So for example, if we were tracking in Of Mice and Men, the development of George. George goes from being quite angry with Lenny, and at the end, spoiler alert, he obviously kills his friend out of mercy. So you want to look what leads to that, because he's very protective of Lenny despite being quite angry at the start. What leads to him to do that? So again, you want to select key quotations to show how he's moved from that. And it's really important that you can also look at other characters as well. So for example, you have Candy, who's an old man who has his dog shot, and that foreshadows what happens with Lenny and the fact that Candy didn't do it himself. So you can see why George takes that role on himself, because you can see how deeply it impacted him, and he actually admits regret at not being there with his dog in his final moments. So again, you might want to choose quotations there to support this development. Also, if you're identifying any techniques such as semantic field or motifs, semantic fields are when you have words related to a particular group, field, or topic. And so it's really important that you choose, 3 or more to prove that is a semantic field. Okay, so both have merit. So it's not that one is better than the other. You want to use a mixture of in-depth quotation and multiple quotations. But remember, the fundamental key golden rule is whenever you make a new point, you support it with a quotation. So it's really important that you encourage your child to do this. And to get the highest marks, it's really important that they embed the quotation. What that means is that it becomes part of the sentence. So I'm not going to look at this extract here, but I'll give you an example. So this question here is, in this extract, Frankenstein can only think about his work. Explain the importance of the obsession elsewhere in the novel. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So, against the backdrop of scientific revolution, romantic opposition to industrialization, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in 1818 explores obsession through 3 interconnected characters whose pursuits lead to destruction. Written while Gavani's experiments with animal electricity captured public imagination, the novel examines how obsession manifests in Victor Frankenstein, his creature, and Robert Walton. Shelley crafts this narrative perhaps to warn against the dangers of masculine scientific rationality divorced from feminine nurture and ethical consideration, while critiquing the single-minded pursuit of knowledge that characterized both scientific advancement and revolutionary thought of the era. So you can see with this introduction, it's really strong, it's really powerful. It introduces their main argument. It uses keywords from the question, and you can see that it also looks at why it's been written. So it looks at the purpose. Okay, so let's have a look at this then in detail. So, and again, I'm just going to show you how you can embed quotations and how you can use a mixture of many quotations and single quotations, and that golden rule. Every time you make a new point, you have a quotation. So Victor Frankenstein's descent into scientific obsession exemplifies the period's anxieties about unchecked scientific advancement, particularly resonant in an era when anatomists like John Hunter were pushing medical boundaries through controversial experimentation. So this is a clear sentence and it's linked to some context. His declaration that life and death appeared to me ideal bounds, which I should first break through and pour a torrent of light into a dark world, mirrors the language of contemporary scientists like Humphrey Davy, who similarly wrote of eliminating nature's mysteries. The abstract noun bounds, combined with the adjective ideal, reflects the Enlightenment's ambition to overcome natural constraints while foreshadowing the humanitarian cost of such ambition. So can you see how they've embedded the quotation from Frankenstein there? And then they've linked it to context, and then they've zoomed in on keywords, and they focused it on in terms of the grammar, the word class, to explain it. Victor's narrative employs a telling semantic field of scientific enlightenment that gradually darkens into one of destruction. Early descriptions utilize terms of elimination and discovery, light, secret, penetrate, unveil, reflecting the optimistic scientific discourse of the era. However, as his obsession deepens, the language transforms into one of darkness and decay, fiend, darkness, tomb, destruction, mirroring contemporary Gothic literature's preoccupation with the dark consequences of scientific advancement. So again, can you see here? There are many quotations used. There's not any in-depth analysis, and it's not warranted here. It doesn't need it. And the reason being is because you can see how they're tracking the change. Okay. And this links to the question, because remember, the question is asking us, explain the importance of the obsession. And so you can see here that they're saying that with the semantic field, the obsession seems good at the start, and as the novel progresses, it becomes dark. And this, again, they've linked very strongly to a literary change that was occurring, which is Gothic literature. Okay, so I hope this illustrates the point really clearly, and you can see that when there's a new point, so the first one, you can see that it's anxieties about unchecked advancement of scientific advancement, and then in the second paragraph, it builds on that argument, and it looks at it in terms of specifically enlightenment to destruction. So can you see that? So it's building the argument. So while it's in the same ideas, which it should be because it's answering this question, it's still a new point. Yeah. So I hope this makes sense, how you can therefore use quotations in depth, and how you can use multiple quotations as well, and how you can decide how many quotations to use. So it's not really about the number of quotations you use, it's about using your quotations effectively, and it's about ensuring that you prove your point, you justify your point. A good analogy to think of, which I like to encourage our students, is to think of it like you're a solicitor, you're a lawyer, you're in a courtroom, and you've got to prove your case, and you need to support it with evidence, and that's where you use your quotations. So let me know what you've got from this video. And if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out. But yeah, enjoy delving into quotations.